the more I testify on it, the harder it gets, the more nervous I get. And I think that's because they're getting more people to testify and support, which is scary. But it's also that the House Judiciary Committee is filled with people who are not listening, who want to push legislation that would affect such a small handful of trans kids, but while harming so many people, not just trans people.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. This episode is part of an ongoing series regarding transgender rights. Today, our guest is David Leslie, a Inupiaq living in Fairbanks who identifies as Sipiniq, or Two-Spirit. We will discuss what that means and how it applies to the culture war playing out in the Alaska Capitol. The inspiration for this trans rights series is 3 bills currently moving through the Alaska State House. One which bans trans girls from playing girls' sports, one which requires kids to get signed permission slips approving their preferred name and pronouns, and one which allows doctors to be sued up to 20 years after treating a trans youth. Alaska has many big problems: the pressing need to increase the funding of our public school system and finding a solution for an imminent energy crisis among them. But instead of working on those very real, very substantial problems, we are spending the last weeks of session debating whether trans youth exist or have rights. They do exist. They do have rights. David Leslie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me.
Can you talk about where you grew up and what your childhood was like?
Yeah. So I was born in a small paper mill town called Bogalusa in Louisiana, but I moved up to Fairbanks when I was 2 weeks old. I was raised by my adoptive grandparents. My mom is where I'm a Inupiaq. My mom's a Inupiaq. She was born in Kotzebue. And when she was a kid, she went to Nome for school, and she ended up in Fairbanks, where she was adopted by my grandpa, and he raised both of us here. And I'm 35, and I grew up going to Denali Elementary and Ryan Middle School and Lathrop High School. And one of the most important things I've done was I joined the Lathrop High School ballroom dance team, where I was the team captain, and we competed in Utah and LA. And that got me into the arts. I did spend 1 year going to college. I went to the Catholic school, St. Mary's College of California. I didn't have that good of an experience, especially because I'm not Catholic. And I came back to UAF, where I double majored in film and broadcast journalism. I did not finish my degree because I was too busy working in film back when the state had a film incentive program. And I also was an adjunct professor of swing dance through a UAF Community and Technical College. And since then, I've done lots of different things. I'm a certified swing and ballroom dance instructor. I've done a lot of film production work. I've helped produce music festivals. Currently, I'm on the board of directors for the Tanana Valley State Fair, where I'm on my 2nd year of being the secretary for the board. And I used to work at the Fairbanks Pioneer Home. I worked in activities there. I was the ASEA 52 union steward. Unfortunately, I had to resign last year to take care of my grandma, who's since passed, and I'm figuring out my life again. So that's the short version.
I'm sorry about your grandmother.
Thank you.
And the grandmother was your Inupiaq grandmother?
No, I was raised by my white grandparents who adopted my mom. It was difficult being raised by white grandparents, and even my mom considered herself mostly white. And I've been on a journey of rediscovering not only my Inupiaq identity, but also how racism has affected me. And there were so many years where I didn't think it did. And especially being queer, realizing the severe amounts of racism within the gay community, that took me many years to piece those together and realize that it really does affect me. Even though I'm not full Native, but even being not full Native, it still affected me and had a negative impact on my life. It's been a difficult journey. I'll say that.
When people see you, do you feel that they read you as Alaska Native?
Yes, I definitely, especially in Alaska, I am seen as native. I have the cherubic Inuit cheeks and the long native hair. But when I travel down to the States, I definitely read white. I get white privilege down there. But in Alaska, people can tell right away. It's it's one of those weird things where your identity is clocked up here, but not down there.
Mhm. And your mom, born in Kotzebue, but raised by your white grandparents in Fairbanks. What's her relationship like with the Inupiaq culture?
She was very removed. She was adopted by my grandpa when he married my biological grandma when she was like 8 or 9. And since then, we haven't really met too many of our extended Native family. And my mom, she finished high school in Louisiana. She did 2 separate 3-year terms in the military and went to South Korea and Germany. And I was born in Louisiana. It's also slightly complicated because when my mom was pregnant with me, she was in a terrible car accident. She didn't even know she was pregnant. And because of her traumatic brain injury, she doesn't remember a lot of those early years in her life. And my biological native grandmother, my understanding is that she died an alcoholic living in a car in downtown Fairbanks before I was even born, which makes it even more difficult to figure out who's my family, who am I related to. I have some names that I'm pretty sure are family, but it is very difficult. Also, I don't know my father. He's some white man down in Louisiana. And so there's just a lot of holes in my own story on both the native side and non-native side. It's complicated.
Gotcha. When did you realize you were queer?
Oh, when I was in elementary school, I started realizing that I was different. And it wasn't really until like middle school that I came to terms with it. I was raised in a Christian household, and that made me confront a lot of things because the way I heard Christians talk about gay people, and I had to come to terms and realize that I had to choose between believing in God or loving myself, and I decided to love myself. I finally started coming out my sophomore year of high school, and I came out to all of my friends, and my brother found out through my MySpace profile, but I did not come out to my grandma or my mom until college. But that being said, I was also the vice president of the Lathrop High School Gay Straight Alliance. I was applying for PFLAG scholarships. I was going to the Pride marches. And that's actually how my grandma found out because I was interviewed for a Pride march. And all my grandma's friends were like, David was in the news for the Pride event. Is he gay? And I'm sure grandma knew.
What was it like being a young gay person in Fairbanks, I guess 20 years ago?
Yeah, it was 20 years ago. I was one of 2 openly gay people in my class at Lathrop High School. And the only other openly gay person, he moved away after sophomore year. And that's when I got involved in the Gay Straight Alliance. And there were obviously other queer people. And I knew that I wasn't the only one, but I was the only one who was out.
And were there any trans people back when you were in high school that you knew of?
There are people who did not know they were trans at the time who are trans now.
Mm.
And there's quite a few of my friends transitioned within about the last 5 years. And it's interesting to look back and realize these people also didn't know who they were or how they could be. I did know trans people from West Valley. For those who don't know, the Lathrop High School GSA had ebbs and flows of years it was active and not active, but the West Valley Gay Straight Alliance was always active. There was a lot more acceptance and exploring identities going on there.
My limited knowledge of Fairbanks means like the west side is more liberal, the east side more conservative. Is that like a pretty good summation, or does that?
Yes, the east side is where the military base is, but also
Lathrop's on the east side, right?
yes. But the big difference to me is West Valley had all of the university professors' kids.
Gotcha.
Lathrop was a lot more poor students, a lot more students of color. It was a lot rougher at Lathrop.
Mm. That brings us to the topic of the day, that we've got these anti-trans bills moving through the Alaska legislature. You reached out to me online about having some discussion about Two-Spirit. And so I'm wondering if you can explain what Two-Spirit is.
Yes. So Two-Spirit was a term coined to name the genders and identities of traditional indigenous people that had been lost or are being rediscovered. I identify as the Inupiaq Sipiniq, which is third gender. And so while it is Two-Spirit, Two-Spirit is specifically for identities lost or being reclaimed.
Okay.
And Sipiniq is weird to me because I don't know exactly what names were used for the people of Kiktigruk, also known as Kotzebue. I could learn a more appropriate name for my people and my culture. There's a great queer Alaska Native Yupik activist, Richard LaFortune. He has a Wikipedia article. He was really instrumental in creating these gay Native American conferences where the term Two-Spirit was coined. And it's a reference to how I don't speak for every Native culture, but many of them had identities that were seen as both male and female together in one person.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where Two-Spirit comes in. But it's important to realize that it's a placeholder for people until they actually learn what their cultures had. And there so many different genders for all the different tribes. Some have fourth or fifth gender. It's not just the three.
Have you interacted with other Two-Spirit people? Do you have a relationship with, for lack of a better word, the Two-Spirit community?
I have met many other Inuit Sipiniq, specifically Inupiaq. There's a big divide in the Native community. It's generational, where our elders understand our traditional ways, and then people older than me but not elders, they really got the brunt of Christianization and the disconnect and loss of their ways. And so I'm at the beginning of reclaiming our identities that were lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have talked with elders. When I say the term Sipiniq, they begin to remember it and remember when their elders talked to them about it when they were kids. And you read about something online, but it doesn't feel really real until your elders are like, no, this is real. I remember it. This is our culture. This is who we are.
So it's like the culture that preceded Christianity being imposed upon it was more accepting and had this much more expansive view of gender, different from Western culture's view of gender. And then you had this Christian overlay that kind of undid some of that. And now folks are trying to rediscover that previous period. Would that be a correct summation?
Yes, it would. And another thing I want to point out is I know specifically about the Inupiaq people of Kiktigruk, also known as Kotzebue.
Mm-hmm.
When you were born, you became the last person who died in the village.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a little boy was born and the last person who died was your grandma, that boy is your grandma. That's his name, that's his gender, that's his identity. And around puberty, you would transition to your adult identity. So we were not only gender fluid, but it made me realize that because I was disconnected from, my family in Kotzebue, I don't know who I was when I was a kid. I don't know who my mom was when she was a kid. And it's that I will probably never know who died before me when I was born. And just to have that huge gap And to know that it was caused through violent genocide and colonization, that I will never know who I was. And it's just a strange existential dread I have that I will never be able to get rid of. And I just have to live with knowing that I will never know who I was, which is a strange thing to say. But when you learn about our culture and you start doing that work, it becomes apparent that it's more than just our gender. It's our connection to our community and our roles in the community in the history of our people. And that has been violently denied us. And it affects me every day.
In the message that you sent me about some discomfort that you don't identify as trans, you identify as Sipiniq, which is different than trans. And so I'm wondering if you can just spell out that difference a little bit for listeners.
Yeah, this is a little beyond Gender 101, but many Sipiniq are trans. So let's just get that out of the way. Like it's not mutually exclusive, but I identify as both male and Sipiniq because I exist in two cultures simultaneously. I'm not multicultural, I'm polycultural. I live both as a man in the westernized European colonizer world, but also in the Inuit world, I'm a Sipiniq. And and just because you reclaim a culture doesn't mean you give up your other one. Cultures are not mutually exclusive. And also for a lot of two-spirit people, discovering what you've always been is not transitioning. The idea that just because I didn't know what two-spirit was doesn't mean that I never was it. I've always been it, and I just discovered who I was.
Can you
And
talk about that discovery?
yeah, it was doing a lot of digging on the internet when I was in college and trying to find resources on queerness and Native issues. A lot of it, like Canada has a much stronger Native community, and they've done a lot more reclamation work and documentation. And they're also a lot more understanding of queer issues. So a lot of my younger research, I'd say, came from a more Canadian perspective. And there is more and more being made around Alaska Natives, but it's not on the same level. And I do feel like there is a stronger oppression against Alaska Natives that we don't really talk about. Both America and Canada have treated their Indigenous people extremely poorly. But there's been a lot less organizing, working together, finding history and disseminating that history in Alaska, but we are catching up.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that Canada has appeared to do a better job than Alaska has?
I don't think it's that Canada has done a better job. I think it's that the Canadian natives have banded together in a way that we haven't seen in Alaska yet. And one of the most important books I read was Inupiaq, The Way of the Human Being. It was written by Harold Napoleon while he was in jail here in Fairbanks. It was the first book I ever read that made me feel proud to be Native. And it also explained to me how I was affected by colonization. Like I used to think it was weird that my mom was born in a tiny little village on the Arctic Ocean coast. But then I realized I was the first person in my family to be not born in Kotzebue. And that was the weird thing. And understanding how these laws were put into place to allow my white grandparents to adopt me and why they thought keeping me out of Native community was actually good for me because they were trying to give me more opportunities. And it all just made sense when I read Inupiaq. And it's available to download for free as a PDF. It's also very cheap. UAF prints it.
I'll put a link in the show notes for that book.
Yeah.
I'm curious about at what point you, as a child or teen or whenever decided, I am Alaska Native. I am going to learn about this. I am going to find out more about that side of myself, in spite of your grandparents' best efforts to make that not happen?
I grew up getting Native awards for art and for my academics, but that was about the extent. And my grandparents did have quite a bit of racism, not just Alaska Native racism, but they basically considered us white. And especially because my blood quantum, it was less than half, I thought that made me less Native.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until the discussions around blood quantum and really reading Uterak and understanding that even I am connected to these people, even if I am mostly white, I'm still Native. You're not, your identity isn't one or the other. You're both. When someone says they're French Canadian, they're not asked, how much French are you?
Is your mother supportive of your efforts to learn more about your Inupiaq heritage and connect with it?
Yeah, she's definitely supportive. She likes to bring up that she thinks that she's the whitest Native and that I would ostensibly be even whiter. But here I am representing Natives, getting in touch with our elders, getting involved in the community. To her, she just saw ourselves as just normal people. And it is strange for her to watch me embrace that and work towards it and represent it.
And is she accepting and supportive of your two-spirit identity, of your Sipiniq identity?
Oh, yeah. I don't really talk to her too much about being Sipiniq, but she does know I'm queer. I talk to her about being a gay Native all the time. She comes to my burlesque shows where I do lots of different gay performance art. And she always loves that I paint my nails, and she's very accepting.
Mm. I've heard you testify against the trans bills that we have moving through the Alaska State House right now. Can you talk about what that experience is watching those bills getting traction and getting hearings right now?
Yeah, it's so the more I testify on it, the harder it gets, the more nervous I get. And I think that's because they're getting more people to testify and support, which is scary. But it's also that the House Judiciary Committee is filled with people who are not listening, who want to harm trans kids and queer kids for their own political gain. And that is just frightening that they are increasing the chances of violence to push legislation that would affect such a small handful of trans kids, but while harming so many people, not just trans people. Cisgender people will get labeled as trans, and that will be an excuse for violence. And we're just seeing it ramp up in the massive amounts of misinformation and people focusing on genital mutilation, which is not happening, but they are testifying in public about it. And it means that someone is deliberately feeding them bad information, and they're doing it for political power. And they have the support of the governor, and they have fundraising support. It's insane. And it is hard to deal with, and it weighs on me, and it sticks with me with everything I do. I'm still not really over how the testimony last week went on the legislation to ban trans healthcare for kids. It's alarming, and there needs to be so much more being done around it.
I think part of the problem is that in America today, conversations are so siloed within certain political walls. So those people have a different set of facts. They've been fed a certain amount of propaganda over and over again, and they believe it's real. And when they're told something different, it's so counter to the narratives that they've been fed that they literally cannot hear something different. And I think that's the struggle for me, is how can I say things so that they'll hear it
And I do not envy your position, but I am growing more and more concerned that the legislative process and the political process has been compromised, and that we're going to need to do more than just testify, do more than just vote once a year. Uh, this kind of hatred it's about power. And there is power in the political process, but if that is in fact compromised, we're going to need to show people through protests and rallies and boycotts that trans and queer youth are important, that they deserve to be defended, that we're not going to just allow the group of mostly Republicans spewing hate. And I grow more scared every day, and I testify because I need to know I did everything I could and exhausted all the options.
Two things. Number one, there's something very performative about moving these three bills, which have absolutely no chance of being taken up in the Senate in any way, shape, or form. So the fact that we are spending these hours and hours listening to testimony and debating and talking about amendments to them, it's just such a waste. These laws are not going to get passed. This is not going to happen. This is really just an opportunity for a small minority of elected folks to signal to their far right base that they are, quote unquote, doing the work. But it's not. They're not doing work. This is not helpful. It's harmful. So I just wanted to make that point. The second thing that you testified about was that these bills were racist. And I guess that's like taking this back to the Sipiniq issue and Two-Spirit issue. And can you talk just a little bit about how these anti-trans bills feel racist to you?
Yeah, considering we're accepting of what we would call queer relationships, I'm fairly certain that our traditional Inupiaq ways didn't call it gay. If two men or a Sipiniq who would be identified as male had a relationship with a man. And so since our cultures did accept relationships of men with men or women with women, and also our cultures were gender fluid, to force this rigid gender identity, trans is a very Western idea. And to force us into that, it's about denying other cultures, specifically denying indigenous Alaskan cultures. And
Right.
again, so many elders remember these ways and tell us about it. And there's the disconnect with people between me and my elders. But this is trans people were just normal and accepted in our cultures. And now here we are trying to limit queer youth from becoming what our cultures have always accepted.
In my experience working in this building in the Capitol, we definitely have some very religious, very Christian Alaska Native folks who are not espousing any of the knowledge that you brought forward. And I think it makes it complicated because those people do exist and they identify as Alaska Natives, and yet they are espousing pretty conservative evangelical Christian values. And I just don't really know how to navigate that.
It's difficult. A lot of it's a trauma response. You bond with your abuser in order to survive the abuse.
Mm.
And so many of these natives, they went to boarding schools. They saw the Christians putting babies in shallow graves in the permafrost. They had their mouths washed out with soap. They were told that they are demonic and evil for speaking their language. And you internalize that in order to survive. And so many Alaska Natives have done that if they just be more Christian, they won't be the next one killed. They won't have their mouth filled with soap. They won't be abused by the priest or nuns. And it's going to take generations. And just like the trauma I experienced as a queer Native growing up, I'm going to live with that forever. And so will these Christian natives. They're going to live with it forever. And the majority of them will probably never be able to recognize how they are participating in their own cultural genocide. And it's difficult. It's a big problem within the Native community, especially Alaska Native corporations have a lot more of the Christian Native involvement. So that makes it very difficult as a queer Native to get involved with our corporation. And it does make me really sad because they're hurting their own family. And there's only so many of us Natives, and we should be working together, and especially using a religion specifically put onto us by the federal government. The federal government paid for Natives to be Christianized. And it's heavy, and religion is so personal. But the best thing I can recommend is to listen to our elders and listen to our youth and make sure that their voices are heard along with the Christian Native voices. I think they should be heard too, but in tandem with our youth and with our elders.
Anything that we didn't cover today? Anything that you want folks to know that I didn't ask about?
Oh, there's just so much going on, and I hope more people get involved, but I also understand that's hard. And if other people don't want to speak up and don't want to be as public and open as I am, that's fine. I understand. But support people like me who are speaking out. And I appreciate you asking me to be on this podcast. And hopefully this will encourage so many other people to speak about their experiences, especially queer Alaska Natives. I want to see every Native corporation celebrate its queer Alaska Native shareholders. That's not happening yet, and I hope that changes soon.
David Leslie, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@aklec.gov or call our office at 907-465-4940.